Greetings, ladies and gents, and welcome to this latest edition of Tales from Outer Space, where I take stories from across the internet and read them for your entertainment. This particular story is called Chaining the Polyglot, written by Dark Prince 010. The High Judicar couldn't understand how the human could still be smiling after all she had endured. Her arms were still restrained behind her and above her head, causing her to lean forward, her head hanging from exhaustion. But as she looked up to greet them with a sardonic "Hi, Judy," they could feel rage bubbling through every vessel in the exoskeleton. "Human spy," they began. She chuckled, coughing and spurting a bit of blood on the floor. "Oh, really, Judy, we're past formalities like that. It's Marcy, like I told you before." The High Judicar suppressed the growl suddenly building in their throats and reiterated. "Human spy, you were caught attempting to access sensitive documentation amongst many other files. I'll ask you again, what was your mission in coming here? Like I said before, I was told to come here and either negotiate a ceasefire or cause a little mayhem. My choice, and you didn't seem much open for discussing peace at the moment." Marcy smiled, baring her bloody teeth at them, her cavalier grin causing the Judicar grip on their ceremonial blade to tighten. They lunged, slicing the blade swiftly and uncaringly, carving another gouge into the human's exposed shoulder. "And yet, you are infiltrating a secure zone that you should never have had access to. How did you get past the guards, sensors, passcodes, without anyone raising the alarm, without anyone noticing an alien freak in your midst?" Marcy just shrugged her shoulders and said nothing more. The High Judicar growled, their thin, multi-jointed digits running along the edge of the blade out of habit. When the prickle of a burr along the metal caught their attention, they barked a command and in-shuffled one of the servants of the lowest caste, bound to involuntary servitude. The High Judicar relished the idea of giving a similar lowly status to the humans once the war concluded and the Empire emerged victorious. The servant shuffled past the guard caste, standing at attention. Stoic beings, as though the High Judicar's own species, unsuited for much more than fighting and dying in glorious service. The servant attended to the High Judicar, and they snapped, "Fetch me a grit prism. My blade needs honing before this human feels its kiss once more." The servant bowed and nodded, but as the Judicar turned to leave the interrogation chamber, the human made an odd trilling whistle with her mouth. The sound was vaguely familiar to the High Judicar's ears, and they noticed the servant perk up, cocking their head. The servant responded in kind with a similar trilling whistle. The High Judicar realized that the human was speaking the lowly language of the Korra. Apparently, she had spoken well enough that the servant understood. After a few more trills, Master looked up at the Judicar, smirking again. "I'm going to say, Judicar, it's real unkind what you lot do to folks you're supposed to shelter and protect. We have found it is a far cleaner mercy," the Judicar replied coldly. "The alternative would be rejection and destruction for those who do not fit in our society." "Oh, so anyone who isn't useful as foot servants, hard laborers, and outright slaves," Marcy sneered. The High Judicar narrowed their eyes. "It is not impossible for a caste to ascend to a higher status. It is a noble aspiration. Not that I would expect humans to understand anything of nobility and duty." "Is that so?" Marcy said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Well, in that case, let me just..." She suddenly let out a large bellow, dropping out of the human tongue. The High Judicar, already suffering through her translator to speak with her, was taken aback. This was a low, basal rumble, something he was surprised the frail human form was even capable of producing. But again, the bellow was returned, resounding in the same deep tones, echoing back from elsewhere in the stronghold complex. The sound was modulated with a pitch and accent that the High Judicar had heard before out of the dry messes. He realized now that what he had assumed to be a call of the wild beasts was actually discussions of another low class, likely the Undera, if he had to hazard a guess. The human winced, flexing her joy before saying, "That one's always a bit tricky. You tend to sound like you're missing all but one of your sets of lungs when speaking it out." She gave off a quick huff. "I suppose that's all I'm working with, so it's a good thing that I was understood at all." She looked directly at the Judicar. "Both Thea and Carews have never seen, let alone heard, of a lower caste being promoted or honored in the entire lifetime, and the Undera have long lifespans, so that's quite some time your whole system's been stagnant. The High Judicar was enraged, the human daring to lecture him based on the word of a mere underass he had never cared nor needed to learn the names of, and was about to lunge forward to assault the human when one of the guards snapped to attention. They touched their earpiece, and in their own speech they said, "High Judicar, there is a message from the Fleet Admiral marked high priority." With a hiss, the High Judicar turned away from his lunge towards the human and stalked over to the communications console in the chamber. He opened the signal, seeing the familiar face of his cousin, the Fleet Admiral and leader of one of the major prongs of the attack on human fortifications and colony worlds. "What news do you have, High Admiral?" the High Judicar asked. "High Judicar, the battle continues, but there are complications," the Admiral replied. "No," the High Judicar shifted into a royal tongue, something the guard caste were not permitted to learn. "Please elaborate." "Cousin, their human holdings are too well fortified for us to batter into submission with an orbital blockade." "So, that's what we have the ground troops for?" His eyes slid over to the guard caste. He paused, thinking that he could hear an echo, but heard nothing. Glaring at the human, he turned his attention back to the hologram on the console. "Send your troops in and wear the human defenses down." "Cousin, the casualties will be immense. The humans are well prepared for a ground assault." "Their bodies are worth more to the Empire if their weight causes even a single crack in the human defenses. They breed and smell like sewer worms, so even if your forces are depleted, you shall have enough to take next human planet in the same manner in just a year," the High Judicar said coldly. The Field Admiral saluted, but there was something off. The High Judicar felt a strange echo in his mind, an odd sense that something was amiss. Looking around, he realized the human's lips were moving slightly, whispering. She wasn't speaking in the human tongue, but in his own. Worse still, it was the low tongue, the speech of the guard caste, and she was repeating the very words that he'd spoken to his cousin in confidence. He raised his hand to strike her, but before the blow could land, it was stopped by the bulky, overdeveloped arm of the guard. "High Judicar," the guard said firmly, "we are not sewer worms." "You are what I say you are, and you'll spend your lives in service as I choose," he hissed back. But to his shock, the guard still held his arm firm. As they did so, the other guard began unclasping and unlocking the huge change. "What? How? Where did you get the key?" the Judicar demanded, his eyes darting around before resting on the servant, who he had forgotten was still in the room. The servant gave a small chill and smile before turning to the human. They held out the ceremonial blade that the High Judicar had ordered to be sharpened. The edge gleamed perfectly, but now the human picked it up, hefting it carefully before lowering the point directly to the Judicar's throat. Smiling, the spy stood, stretching and flexing while keeping the blade leveled at him. "It always amazes me how many opportunities open up when you know how to speak the lingo," she said. "Now, Judy, let's talk a ceasefire." Story number 2, Details Matter, written by Zalurker. The security officer looked at the man seated across from him. "You can really drop the pretense now. We traced your movements for the past few months and picked up the rest of your cell." He paused for effect. "That includes the instruction team that you had waiting off Maui." The man across from him looked up, surprised. Until a few moments ago, he had been adamant that they had made a mistake. His demeanor changed. He sat up, and in the eerily human move, tilted his head. "How?" he asked. "How did you catch us? What gave me away?" It was not usually protocol to divulge too much information during an exchange. But the Imperium had definitely not expected their spy to be picked up that easily, and it was good to keep them unbalanced. More chance that they would be let something slip. "Your disguise is perfect, even down to the cellular level. For a while we thought that you were a human mercenary team. It took our tech running a deep scan to pick up some discrepancies. The same goes for the rest of your people." He looked down at the report in front of them. "I really have to compliment your scientists. This was good work. The conversion treatment must have hurt." The man looked at him and smiled. "It was worth it. As a servant of the Emperor, he crossed his arms. But you haven't answered my question. What gave me away? The security officer crossed his arms, mirroring his target, feigning indifference. His contacts was showing him an overlay of the biometrics of the spy's body, and the facial heat map and EEG was indicating genuine curiosity. You didn't blink right. What? One of the people in your department has certain neurological issues that affect 1% of our population. They have to concentrate to read normal human interactions and social cues. It is something that they learn to fake and fit in. And yours was wrong. You didn't blink right, and your way of making eye contact was wrong. He also noticed a few other things. It was so subtle that most people would not have picked up on it. I don't understand. It eventually bothered him enough to raise it with security. Everything about you checked out, but he was so persistent that we placed you under observation. Eventually, other things stood out. Have to compliment you. You would have passed most security reviews and did. By the way, you would have received a promotion next week. The man slumped back in his chair. Years of work, and I didn't blink right. The security officer shrugged and pretended to sympathize. Don't worry, it takes all kinds. End of story. I'd quickly like to thank the T5 peeps: Cold War Boomerwaffen, Severin Cerberus, Bushmaster 177, Henry the Red, Caspar Arnholtz, Cold War Boomerwaffen, Elijah Silvercross, Dragzoon WRE, and Severin Cerberus. Thank you very much.